Hi, this is Tom Broussard. It is Tuesday, March 9th, 2021, and today we're going to talk about aphasia recovery and word finding, neuro knitting by any other name. In my case, after my stroke and not really understanding how this was going to work, how I would, quote, get better, I kept, with my speech therapy, I've been told that word finding was a process, was the act of doing whatever you do. And there were all kinds of activities that I would do, but it was always word finding and repetition. Again, not really knowing how that would make people get better, how the brain would get better, how language would get better. But word finding was definitely the process of doing whatever I was encouraged to do. And it turns out, as I thought about it, and you have to think hard about it, and that seems to be part of that process too, you have to actually consider that there's a word that you can't say, but as you think about it, you can see it in your brain, you come close to getting close to it, you can try to start this process of word finding. It was only later when I realized that word finding has an awful lot to do with effort and interest. I mean, you have to be interested in considering getting better, and it takes a lot of, quote, effort, even if it's cognitive effort, to the fact that you actually have to sort through your thoughts looking for that particular word, or at least those words that are associated with that word, and you come close to that word, and continue to look for it until you can possibly find it with other associated words going forward. But that was all part of the issue. And when they talk about word finding and repetition, well, it's a lot of repetition in terms of the time it takes you to consider and search for and look for and find associated words. That's all the repetition component, and it's all the effort that is required. But again, without really knowing what the steps would be, and they're not, there are no particular steps that would make this all work, other than encouraging you to do these kinds of processes. It is a lot like knitting, because the body is such that you can lock into memory knitting, as an example, or riding a bike, or tying your shoes. So locked in memory such that you really don't know what your hand is doing if you were knitting or doing these other kinds of things. It does appear, though, that that's the way the brain works. So with repetition and, quote, word finding, which is to say, inducing or indulging yourself to consider all these interesting action verbs to, quote, look for and, quote, find those words. Well, the more you do that, the closer you get to getting to what you want to find. The more you do, the better you get at doing whatever those doings might otherwise be. But that's the repetition component of that. So if you, after your stroke, you go days, weeks, months, in my case, years, for many, many, many people, it takes a long time to get better. But it's the repetition component that actually, based on the principles of plasticity, one of those principles is repetition. And it isn't like they tell you, oh, you're not going to sit here and say these words over and over and over again. That's not the repetition we're really talking about. But it is really the repetition of thinking your way through this problem. And that's the repetition component. Thinking your way through the problem gives you a new perspective every time you think about it, because the word moves around you. So if you go for your walk, you go for a drive, you meet other people, all of that activity allows you to repeat in your mind, which is to say, try to find another way to find that particular word that you are looking for going forward. So it does turn out that that is a large component of how that works, and building it into how the body works in your mind, such that it will find it and do it as a result of the repetition, such that you'll remember it the next time. And it becomes easier and easier and easier as you get closer and closer and closer to finding that particular word going forward. But as I say here, I'll read this. The act of finding, searching, exploring, hunting, remembering, or imagining a word and its resultant activities is the perfect process of the act of word finding. And I'll read the rest of this too. The lost words from aphasia still exist, which is true. We can see things, but we can't say things. That's because we can actually see in our mind the way the word is, the item that we want to say. There's a roof in front of me. If I'm trying to say the word roof and I can't get to it, I can still see it. I can see it in my brain, but I cannot say roof. I just can't get there. But the more you do that, the more the repetition component of saying that word roof with the R, the O's, and the F, the closer you get to that. So it's very interesting that since you can see it, but you can't say it, now I'll go back to reading this again. The lost words from aphasia still exist, yet they are a faint trace. They are still perceptible. You can actually see them. You can actually come close to saying that word that you can actually see that's just a shadow of what it used to be. That is all part of the way the brain works, because clearly there is a critical mass of data, of information, of dendrites, synapses, the learning field that clearly are damaged. It isn't like you damaged the entire word, but you damaged enough of those trillions of synapses that are now gone, that have to be regrown, that they can still get in close enough to deliver the message, but they can't deliver it yet, but they can still see it. It just has to break the critical mass. Now it can be exposed again and sent again as before. Now I go back to reading that sentence again. The lost words from aphasia still exist, yet a faint trace is still perceptible of what they once were. Every time the lost word is searched for, the trace becomes less faint and more visible. And that is the way it worked for me. I can actually feel it. When I say feel, what does anybody know when you are actually having that conversation with your own brain, saying, oh, I'm getting better at saying that roof, that word, right? How is that really happen? Well, it turns out that that is the way it happens, because anything you decide to learn on the outside means that you have built underneath the neurological components that support that learning that is now something you can do on the outside. So the truth is, the way the brain works, whatever you do, I really do mean that, if you learn anything new, as innocent as it might be, as small as it might be, it's still, to do that, builds the neurological components that support that learning. It doesn't happen any other way. But that's why we have trillions of synapses, trillions of synapses. Every time we talk, we have this conversation, we're on TV, everything that we remember, it is building on the inside what we are working on understanding and learning and speaking about on the outside, every single time. The act of what I call effortful trying induces the appropriate act of knitting the word. Sorry, world, yes, word. Every single time. Every induced, I'll read this, every induced dependent activity produces brain flows that create more dendrites, spines, synapses, and networks. Billions of those bits of neuromatter eventually recreate the lost words. The more conscious act is repeated, the more the unconscious internal act triggers a corresponding amount of growth with what I now call Plasticity, Inc. You might as well think about it that way. As you write on the outside, whether you're writing it in a diary, recording your voice, looking at, taking pictures of information, words that are otherwise, quote, damaged, the more you do those things, on the inside, there's a pen with Plasticity, Inc. And as much as it is working on the outside, it is quickly as possibly writing on the inside what it is you are doing. And even if you cannot yet say what you want to say in terms of word finding, it is still writing it down and saying, oh, as if there was a third person in there saying, oh, Tom, I can see that he is doing these things. He is trying to do it. And as he tries to provide the effort that is needed, I am writing down that the effort itself is building more dendrites and synapses, so that tomorrow when I try to write using this Plasticity ink pen, I will write it easier, better, more complete. And whether it takes, again, weeks or months or even years, with that particular pen, it will continue to knit the word. The word. Always have a hard time between the world and word, making that all work. And that just happens to be another component of how the brain works, to the degree that I can tell the difference. I can see this fork in the road between word and world, and it makes it more difficult just because of the nuances of that particular word. But that too is how the brain works, because at the same time, there's that little guy on the inside that is still writing with that particular pen and saying, come on, Tom, work on this. It is word versus world. That is all part and parcel how the brain works. And I do like the knitting, neuro knitting that goes on the inside, because that is exactly, it isn't exactly, it is most exactly what is happening on the inside, depending on what you're doing on the outside. It really does get back to, of course, when people say, well, what is it I should do? Well, the 5 rules, I'll say them again, the 5 rules of aphasia recovery or learning of almost any other thing starts with motivation, and then practice, 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 and more practice. I'll say, unfortunately, for those who really aren't motivated and don't like to practice, then that's another issue. But that is how the brain works. That is how we learn on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much for viewing today. And I will see you in 2 more weeks with another presentation about how the brain works and repairs itself. I say all by itself, but that's really not the way it works. It works all by itself as long as the one that's operating the machinery on the outside is motivated enough and has the energy to do the repetition component of plasticity that induces the learning as a result. Thanks again, everybody. Nice to see you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.